How long is a sword grip supposed to be? Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now I'm going to try and keep this relatively brief. Also brief apologies for my voice, I'm just recovering from a cold. So this video is inspired by Garrett Fox, who emailed me asking for some advice about a sword purchase, specifically the Kingston Arms Renaissance side sword. Brief answer to Garrett, I don't think you'll have any problems with the hand length on that, but it did inspire me to make this video answering the question, how long is a sword grip supposed to be? Now I'm going to be as brief as possible because in essence this is a simple question. This only applies to one-handed swords incidentally, but the basic answer is it depends how you're going to use it, okay? So quite simply, when you're looking at grip lengths or hilt lengths on one-handed swords, it entirely depends on how you're supposed to hold that sword or how you're intended to hold that sword. So what I'm holding here is an African Takuba sword, and from the Sudan-ish area. And quite simply, this is a very confined hilt. Now, we've looked at confined hilts before when we've looked at things like the Indian talwar, the Persian shamshir, the Turkish kilich, and additionally when we've looked at Viking era hilts as well. And these are confined hilts for a reason, because they're wanting you to hold the sword in certain ways. Not always the same way, incidentally, but they usually have really short grips, either because they want to jam your hand in there, or they want to enforce you to interact with the pommel in a certain way, as on Viking era hilts, that's my belief anyway, or in terms of the talwar, they want to encourage you to cut a certain way with a relatively angular wrist and draw cutting. So in that sense, if it's a confined hilt with all of the fingers within the hilt, but with a specific type of cutting, this is often associated with cutting swords. Swords from a sort of, should we say, a cutting culture where they're cutting more than thrusting. If we now move along later in the medieval period, you'll find that medieval arming swords usually have a slightly longer hilt. Now this can be for a number of reasons. It can be because you're going to use more of a handshake grip. It can be because you're going to be thrusting a little bit more, so you want to be able to extend the sword out. But additionally, it can be for things like the fact that you might be wearing gauntlets, whether it's in the era of mail, aka chainmail, or whether it's in the era of plate armour. If you have a sword hilt that you're going to have to wear with some type of glove or gauntlet, it needs to be slightly bigger. In the Viking era, they didn't seem to wear any types of gloves or gauntlets to hold their hilts, so they can have a small hilt. Equally, in North Africa, or for the most of the time in Persia, and Ottoman Turkey and so on and so forth, they're not wearing gauntlets as we would normally think of them. That's one possible reason. It is also to do with cutting style and how much you're going to use the point. Generally speaking, if you're using the point more, you want to extend the blade out more. You want to be able to extend the hand along the grip, so you need a bit more grip length. So we do find in Europe there's a general trend through the medieval period for grips to get a bit longer on one-handed swords. But an interesting thing happens, particularly in Italy and Spain, so let's say southern Europe in the 14th century, probably started in the 13th century, but became prevalent in the 14th century and became very common in the 15th century, and that was to do this. To put the index finger over the guard. Now you do this for a number of reasons. I've done fingering the guard. If you search in my videos for fingering the guard was very happy about this. But if you search for fingering the guard, you'll find out the reasons for fingering the guard. I won't go into it in this video. But when you finger the guard, it has a strange secondary effect, because formerly we've got 4 fingers around the grip. Now we've only got 3 fingers around the grip. So let's transition now to the more specialised sword developed for fingering the guard with fingerings. So these fingerings first appear around the year 1400. On arming swords, but they develop into a swept hilt found on side swords and rapiers, such that you can now put the finger over that guard, the front guard, round the ricasso, and it's protected by the fingering. This now means you don't need such a long grip. If you're always going to be fingering the guard, then you can get away with a shorter grip. Now, it should be noted that doesn't mean that there necessarily is going to be a shorter grip, but there can be. So sometimes the grip is maintained to be long, partly for balance reasons probably. However, we do find some side sword and rapier hilts are really quite short. Now, with this sword, you would usually only put one finger over the guard, but there are types of rapier where you're actually intended to put two fingers over the guard, particularly Spanish cup hilts. And now, if you're putting two fingers over the guard, you've now only got two fingers around the grip, and if you look at some Spanish cup hilt rapiers, they've got really crazy short grips. And people think, why is the grip so short? And it's because half of your hand is over the guard, okay? It's inside the cup and protected by the cup and it's changing the point of balance and point of rotations and the way you're gripping the sword and everything. There are various other ways of gripping the sword. You can put two fingers over the two fingerings like that, less common in any systems I've studied, or additionally you can just put the thumb up the ricasso, but all of these things lead to you having less hand on the grip. So very often you'll find that the grip length on a rapier, for example, will be very short, but that's because you haven't got as much hand on the grip anymore. You've now got some of it above the guard, relative to earlier arming swords. Final type of sword I'll mention is military sabres. So some military sabres are basically the same kind of gripping priority as an arming sword, whereby most of the time you're going to have the entirety of your hand around the grip. Okay, so if we look at a lot of cavalry sabres, particularly in the Georgian era and into the 19th century, they only have grips which allow enough space for you to get your fist around. But as we get later in the 19th century, we find an increasing length of hilt, and this is to enable the thumb up the back. And you'll notice that with short grips like a 1796 light cavalry sabre, it's very difficult to get your thumb up the back. There's not enough length in the grip. So the reason that these swords have a particularly long grip now is so that you can lay your thumb fully up the back, which has some of the same benefits as putting your finger over a quill on. So, to conclude, grip length. Grip length is really relative to what type of sword it is, how it's supposed to be gripped, how it's supposed to be used, how much you thrust and cut with it, and how you cut with it, what method of cutting, and these kind of things. But when you look at grip length, don't only think about the physical length of the grip, think about the amount of sword that your hand occupies. And in the case of a rapier, I might be holding a rapier in a very similar way to this, but the guard would be underneath the index finger instead of above it, because you've got a finger ring, you've got a ricasso, you've got a cup hilt or a swept hilt or a multi-bar hilt above the hand. So it's a different type of hilt construction. So don't always judge a sword from its hilt length without knowing more about how it's supposed to be gripped and how it's supposed to be used. I hope that gives a quick little summary and aids your understanding of this very interesting subject, actually, which I could spend a lot longer talking about, but this is just a quick overview. If you've got any particular questions on this topic, anything I didn't cover, anything you want to add, then I hope to see it down in the comments below. Cheers for watching.
Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.